The water from the creek glinted silver under the moon, and Austin Xavier could hear the rhythmic sound of fabric being scrubbed against stone even before he saw her kneeling there at the water's edge. It was past midnight in Red River, New Mexico, and the summer heat of 1878 had barely lifted with the coming of darkness. He had been riding fence line for the Patterson Ranch, where he worked as a hired hand, checking for breaks in the wire that coyotes and cattle might slip through. The creek ran along the eastern boundary of the property, and he had not expected to find anyone out here at this ungodly hour. Yet there she was, a slight figure bent over the water, with her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, working soap into a faded blue dress with movements that spoke of exhaustion. Austin pulled his horse to a stop in the shadow of a cottonwood tree, not wanting to startle her, but uncertain whether to announce himself or simply turn back the way he had come. He recognized her after a moment of watching. Delilah Hayes, the new schoolteacher who had arrived in Red River 3 months ago from somewhere back east. She had taken the position when old Miss Cordelia finally retired, and the whole town had been curious about the young woman who would be teaching their children. She lived in the small house behind the church that the town provided for the teacher, a modest building with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when it rained. Austin had seen her in town a handful of times, always dressed neatly if plainly, always walking with her head held high despite the whispers that followed her. He watched as she lifted the dress from the water and wrung it out with strong hands, then draped it over a nearby bush. Only then did he notice what she was wearing, a thin chemise and petticoat, both of which had seen better days, and nothing else. The realization struck him like a physical blow. She was washing her only dress in the middle of the night because she had nothing else to wear during the day. While it dried, she had to stay here by the creek, waiting in her undergarments until the fabric was dry enough to put back on. The cruelty of it made his chest tighten. He knew that teaching paid poorly, especially in a small town like Red River, where the school board scraped together whatever funds they could from families who often had little enough themselves. But he had not imagined that anyone could be struggling quite this badly. She was washing her dress every night because it was the only one she owned, and she could not afford to take even a single day to let it dry properly during daylight hours when someone might see it hanging outside her house and realize her predicament. Delilah sat down on a flat rock near the water's edge, hugging her knees to her chest as she waited. In the moonlight, Austin could see that she was shivering despite the warm night air. He made his decision then, as quietly as he could manage. He turned his horse and rode back toward the ranch house, his mind already working through what he needed to do. The bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept was dark and quiet when he returned. Austin shared the space with 5 other men, all of them snoring away after a long day of work. He moved carefully to his trunk at the foot of his narrow bed and opened it as silently as possible. Inside were his few possessions: 3 changes of clothes, a spare pair of boots, a leather-bound Bible his mother had given him before she died, and a small wooden box that held his savings. He had been putting away money for nearly 2 years now, saving up to buy his own piece of land someday. There was $63 in the box, more money than he had ever had at one time in his 24 years of life. Austin counted out $20 and tucked the bills into his shirt pocket. It would be enough, he hoped, enough for fabric and maybe some ready-made clothing from the general store. He would have to be careful about how he approached this. Delilah Hayes struck him as the proud sort, and he could not simply hand her money or clothing without risking her pride and dignity. But he could not unsee what he had witnessed either. He could not go back to his daily routine knowing that the schoolteacher was washing her only dress in the creek every night, waiting in the darkness for it to dry enough to wear again. Sleep did not come easily that night. Austin lay awake on his bunk, staring at the rough wooden ceiling and trying to come up with a plan that would work. By the time dawn broke over the mountains to the east, he had the beginnings of an idea. He waited until Sunday, when he knew the general store would be closed and the whole town would be at church services. Austin had never been particularly religious, but he made a point of attending that morning, sitting in the back pew where he could watch Delilah without being obvious about it. She sat near the front with the children she taught, her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. She wore the same blue dress he had seen her washing, and it looked neat and clean despite its obvious age. Her dark hair was pinned up in a simple style, and her face had a kind of quiet determination that made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with regular features or fashionable clothes. Reverend Thompson preached about charity and caring for one's neighbors, and Austin felt the words settle over him like a benediction. After the service ended, he waited until most of the congregation had filed out, before approaching the Reverend's wife, Martha Thompson, a practical woman in her 50s who knew everything that happened in Red River and had a reputation for both discretion and compassion. "Mrs. Thompson, I wonder if I might have a word with you," Austin said, keeping his voice low. Martha looked at him with sharp, assessing eyes. "Of course, Mr. Xavier. Shall we step outside?" They walked to the small garden behind the church, where Martha grew vegetables for families who needed extra food. The morning sun was already beating down with fierce intensity, promising another scorching day. "I need your help with something delicate," Austin began, then stopped, unsure how to explain what he had seen without exposing Delilah's circumstances to gossip. Martha waited patiently, and something in her expression told him that she might already know more than he expected. "It's about Miss Hayes," he continued. "I happened to be riding fence line a few nights ago and saw her washing clothes at the creek late at night, and I realized that she might be struggling more than folks know." Martha's expression softened. "You're a good man to notice and to care, Mr. Xavier. The truth is, the school board hasn't been able to pay her full salary these past 2 months. Several families have fallen behind on their contributions, and we've only been able to give her about half of what was promised. She hasn't complained once, but I've been worried about her." Austin felt anger rise in his chest, not at Martha or even at the families struggling to pay, but at the whole unfair situation. "I'd like to help her, but I need to do it in a way that won't embarrass her or make her feel like charity." Martha studied him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working behind those intelligent eyes. "You're sweet on her, aren't you?" "I barely know her," Austin protested, feeling heat rise in his face. "I just don't think it's right that she should have to suffer like that." "No, it isn't right," Martha agreed. "And I think I might have an idea. My sister in Santa Fe sends me dress patterns and fabric sometimes, more than I can ever use. I've been meaning to offer some to Miss Hayes, but I didn't want to presume. If you were to purchase some fabric and notions from the store, I could present them to her as if they were gifts from my sister. I could even offer to help her sew some new dresses, make it into a social occasion so it doesn't feel like charity." Austin felt relief wash over him. "That would be perfect. I have money, $20. Is that enough?" Martha's eyebrows rose. "That's very generous, Mr. Xavier. That's enough for several dresses worth of fabric, plus thread and buttons and whatever else she needs. But I have to ask, why are you willing to spend so much on someone you barely know?" He thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated and simple at the same time. Because nobody should have to wash their only dress in the middle of the night and wait in the dark for it to dry. Because she's teaching our children, and she deserves better than what she's getting. And because I can help, so I should. Martha smiled then, a warm expression that transformed her stern features. "Your mother raised you right, young man. Come by the parsonage tomorrow evening with the money, and I'll go to the store on Tuesday when it opens. I'll handle everything from there." Austin felt the weight lift from his shoulders as he handed over the $20. It was done then, or at least set in motion. He could not undo whatever circumstances had brought Delilah Hayes to Red River with nothing but a single dress to her name, but he could make her present situation a little more bearable. He did not see Delilah again until Wednesday afternoon, when he rode into town to pick up supplies for the ranch. She was walking down the main street with 3 of her students, clearly on some kind of educational outing. She wore the same blue dress, but there was something different about her expression. She looked lighter somehow, as though some invisible burden had been lifted. When she noticed him watching, she smiled and offered a small wave. Austin tipped his hat to her, feeling his heart do something strange and unexpected in his chest. That night, he found himself riding back to the creek long after his work was done. He told himself it was just to check the fence line again, but he knew he was lying. He wanted to see if she was still washing her dress there, or if Martha had already given her the fabric and started helping her sew new clothes. The creek was empty when he arrived, just the sound of water moving over stone and the chirp of crickets in the grass. He felt satisfaction settle over him, followed immediately by a strange sense of disappointment. He had wanted to see her again, he realized, not to catch her in a vulnerable moment, but just to see her, to talk to her maybe, to know more about the woman who had traveled all the way from the east to teach school in a dusty New Mexico town. Austin returned to the ranch feeling unsettled in a way he could not quite name. He had spent his whole life working with his hands, moving from ranch to ranch as a hired cowboy. saving what he could and dreaming of the day when he would have his own land. There had been women here and there, brief encounters in saloons or dance halls, nothing that lasted or meant much beyond the moment. He had always told himself that he would think about courting and marriage once he had something to offer, once he was established and secure. But Delilah Hayes had gotten under his skin with just a glimpse of her washing clothes in the moonlight, and he could not seem to shake her loose. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm. Austin worked long days mending fences, moving cattle, and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the schoolteacher. He started finding excuses to ride into town more often, and he always seemed to catch sight of her. Sometimes she was walking with her students, pointing out plants or rock formations, and turning the whole world into a classroom. Other times she was at the general store, carefully counting out coins for flour and sugar and other necessities. Once, he saw her at the church, helping Martha Thompson hang laundry on the line behind the parsonage. It was on one of these trips to town that Martha called out to him from the church steps. "Mr. Xavier, a moment, please." He dismounted and walked over, curiosity making his steps quick. Martha had a satisfied expression on her face, the look of someone who had accomplished something important. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure they would not be overheard. "Miss Hayes and I have been sewing together in the evenings, and she's made 3 new dresses already. She was so grateful for the fabric, though she had no idea where it really came from. I think it's made a real difference for her." Austin felt warmth spread through his chest. "I'm glad. She deserves to have more than one dress." "She does," Martha agreed. "And she's been asking about you, you know." His heart jumped. "What do you mean?" "She wanted to know who you were, where you came from, that sort of thing. I think she noticed you noticing her." Martha's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I told her you were a good man, hard-working and honest. I may have also mentioned that you're unmarried and that you've been saving up to buy your own ranch someday." Austin felt his face heat up. "Mrs. Thompson, you're meddling." "Of course I am," she said cheerfully. "It's one of the privileges of being the Reverend's wife. Besides, you did a kind thing for her, and she's a lovely young woman who deserves a good man. It seems to me that the Lord might be putting the 2 of you in each other's paths for a reason." Before Austin could respond to that, the door to the church opened and Delilah herself stepped out. She was wearing a new dress, a pale green calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder. When she saw Austin standing there with Martha, she paused, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. "Miss Hayes," Martha said warmly, "you remember Mr. Xavier, don't you?" "Of course," Delilah said softly. Her voice had a slight Eastern accent, refined but not pretentious. "You work at the Patterson Ranch, is that right?" Austin found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Yes, madam, I'm the head fence rider there." "That must be demanding work," she said, and he heard genuine interest in her tone. "I've seen the Patterson property. It's quite extensive." "It keeps me busy," he admitted. "But I like the work. I like being outside, working with the land and the animals." Martha cleared her throat delicately. "Well, I should get back inside and finish preparing for tonight's Bible study. Miss Hayes, I'll see you tomorrow evening for more sewing. Mr. Xavier, always a pleasure." She disappeared back into the church before either of them could say anything, leaving them standing together in the afternoon sun. Delilah laughed softly, a sound like water over smooth stones. "I think Mrs. Thompson is trying to play matchmaker." "I think you might be right," Austin said, allowing himself to smile. "She's not very subtle about it." "No, she's not," Delilah agreed. Then she looked at him more directly, and he saw curiosity and something else in her green eyes. "But I don't mind. I've seen you around town, and I've wondered about you. You always seem so focused and serious, like you're thinking about important things." He did not know what to say to that. The truth was that he had been thinking about her, wondering about her story and how she had ended up in Red River, but he could not tell her that, without revealing what he had seen that night at the creek. "I've wondered about you too," he said instead. "It's not often we get a new schoolteacher, especially one from back east. What brought you all the way to New Mexico?" Something shuddered in her expression, and he knew he had touched on a painful subject. "It's a long story," she said carefully. "The short version is that I needed a fresh start, and Red River offered me that opportunity." Austin understood about needing fresh starts. He had left his own home in Texas 5 years ago after his mother died, and his father drank himself into an early grave. He had been drifting from place to place ever since, working hard and saving money and trying to build something that would last. "I understand that," he said gently. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is move forward and build something new." Delilah looked at him with surprise, as though she had not expected him to understand. "Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to do." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, and Austin found himself not wanting the conversation to end. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked, then immediately worried he had been too forward. "I mean, if you have time. I know you must be busy with school and everything." But she smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "I'd like that. I have about an hour before I need to be back to prepare tomorrow's lessons." They walked down the main street of Red River, past the general store and the saloon and the blacksmith shop. Austin kept a respectful distance between them, aware of how small towns talked and not wanting to damage her reputation. Delilah told him about her students, about how bright and eager they were despite the difficult circumstances many of them faced. She talked about the books she was teaching from and her hopes to acquire more materials for the schoolhouse. He could hear the passion in her voice when she spoke about education, about the difference it could make in children's lives. In turn, Austin told her about the ranch, about the satisfaction of building good fences and caring for the cattle, about his dream of someday owning his own land. He surprised himself with how much he opened up to her. There was something about Delilah that made him want to share things he usually kept locked away inside. They ended up at the edge of town, where the land opened up into scrubby desert dotted with sagebrush and juniper. The mountains rose up in the distance, purple and majestic against the deepening blue of the afternoon sky. "It's beautiful here," Delilah said, shading her eyes with her hand as she looked out at the landscape. "So different from where I grew up, but beautiful in its own way." "Where did you grow up?" Austin asked. "Philadelphia," she said. "My father was a banker, and we lived in a nice house, in a nice neighborhood. Everything was very proper and structured." She paused, and he could see her choosing her words carefully. "I was engaged to be married to a man my father chose for me. He was wealthy and well-connected, and my father thought it was an excellent match." Austin felt his stomach drop. "Was?" he asked. "I broke the engagement 3 months before the wedding," Delilah said, and he heard both pride and pain in her voice. "I realized that I couldn't marry someone I didn't love, someone who saw me as a pretty ornament to display rather than a person with my own thoughts and dreams. My father was furious. He disowned me, told me I was throwing away my future and bringing shame on the family." "I'm sorry," Austin said, and he meant it. He could imagine how difficult that must have been, how much courage it must have taken to walk away from everything she knew. "Don't be," Delilah said firmly. "It was the best decision I ever made. I went to live with my mother's sister in Boston, and she helped me get certified as a teacher. When I saw the advertisement for the position in Red River, I knew it was exactly what I needed. A chance to start over somewhere no one knew me or my history, somewhere I could build a life on my own terms." Austin felt a surge of admiration for her. "That took real courage. Or foolishness," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "Sometimes I'm not sure which." "Courage," Austin said firmly. "Definitely courage. You gave up everything comfortable and familiar to be true to yourself. That's not foolish. That's brave." Delilah looked at him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes, though she was smiling. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, and Austin felt something shift between them. This was not just attraction or curiosity anymore. This was the beginning of something real, something that could matter. "I should get back," Delilah said reluctantly. "But I'd like to do this again if you would." "I'd like that very much," Austin said. "Maybe I could take you to dinner sometime. The hotel restaurant isn't fancy, but the food is decent." "That sounds wonderful," she said, and her smile made his chest feel tight. He walked her back to the small house behind the church, keeping that respectful distance even though part of him wanted to take her hand. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. "Thank you for the walk and the conversation, Austin. It's been a long time since I've felt like I could be honest with someone." "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he replied. "And please, call me Austin. Mr. Xavier makes me sound like my father." "Austin," she said, trying it out, "and you should call me Delilah." He tipped his hat to her and waited until she was safely inside, before turning to walk back to where he had left his horse. The whole ride back to the ranch, he could not stop smiling. He had come to town for supplies and ended up finding something far more valuable. Over the next several weeks, Austin and Delilah fell into a pattern. He would ride into town on Sunday afternoons after church, and they would take walks together, exploring the countryside around Red River and talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved poetry and could recite entire passages from memory. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor and could make her laugh with his dry observations about ranch life. They talked about their pasts and their hopes for the future, and with each conversation, Austin felt himself falling deeper into something he had never experienced before. It was not always easy. Austin was painfully aware that he had very little to offer her. He was just a hired hand with some money saved up and a dream of owning land someday. Delilah had come from wealth and privilege, even if she had walked away from it. What if she eventually tired of the hard life in Red River and wanted to go back east? What if she realized she had made a mistake in giving up her comfortable existence? But every time those doubts crept in, he would see the way her face lit up when she spotted him riding into town, or feel the warmth of her hand when they walked close together, and the doubts would fade. This was real. What they were building together was solid and true, even if it was still new and fragile. One evening in late September, after they had been courting for nearly 2 months, Austin worked up the courage to tell Martha Thompson the truth about the fabric money. They were at the church for a social gathering, and he found the Reverend's wife alone in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to tell Delilah the truth about the fabric," he said without preamble. Martha looked up from the coffee pot, her expression thoughtful. "Are you sure that's wise? She's so proud, and finding out that you bought it for her might embarrass her." "I know," Austin said, "but we've been courting for 2 months now, and I can't build something real with her while keeping secrets. She deserves to know, and besides, I'm not ashamed of what I did. I saw someone struggling and I helped. That's nothing to hide." Martha smiled. "You're right, of course. You're a good man, Austin Xavier. When will you tell her?" "Tonight, if I can get her alone for a few minutes." His opportunity came about an hour later when Delilah stepped outside to get some air. Austin followed her out into the cool evening, his heart pounding in his chest. "Delilah, I need to tell you something," he began, then stopped, trying to figure out how to explain. She turned to face him, concern crossing her features. "What is it? You look so serious." "Do you remember when Mrs. Thompson gave you that fabric? She said her sister had sent it from Santa Fe?" "Yes, of course. It was so generous of her." Austin took a deep breath. "The fabric wasn't from her sister. I paid for it. I gave Mrs. Thompson $20 to buy fabric and notions for you, and she was kind enough to present it as a gift so you wouldn't feel like it was charity." Delilah stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and something that might have been anger. "You what? But why would you do that? We barely knew each other then." This was the hard part, the part where he had to admit what he had seen. "I was riding fence line one night in late July, and I saw you at the creek. You were washing your dress, and I realized it was because you didn't have anything else to wear. I couldn't stand the thought of you struggling like that. So, I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept money or charity directly. So I asked Mrs. Thompson to help me find a way to give you the fabric without embarrassing you." Delilah's hand went to her mouth, and he saw mortification flood her features. "You saw me? Oh God, I was wearing nothing but my undergarments. I must have looked so pathetic." "No," Austin said firmly, stepping closer to her. "You didn't look pathetic. You looked strong and determined and resourceful. You were doing what you needed to do to survive, and there's no shame in that. But I had the means to help, and it felt wrong not to do something." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "I was so embarrassed about my situation. The school board hadn't been paying my full salary, and I had spent most of what I had getting here and setting up my house. I couldn't afford new clothes, but I couldn't let anyone in town know how badly I was struggling. They would have thought I couldn't handle the job, or worse, they would have pitied me." Austin could not stand to see her cry. He closed the distance between them and gently took her hands in his. "I understand pride, Delilah. I understand wanting to stand on your own 2 feet and not accept help. But sometimes accepting help from someone who cares about you isn't weakness. It's just being human." She looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face. "You cared about me even then, when you didn't even know me?" I saw someone struggling who didn't deserve to struggle, Austin said. And yes, maybe part of me was already starting to care about you, even if I didn't realize it yet. All I knew was that I couldn't walk away and pretend I hadn't seen. Delilah pulled one hand free and wiped at her tears. I should be angry with you for keeping this secret, but I can't be. What you did was so kind, and I know it must have cost you a significant amount of money. $20 is a lot for a ranch hand. It was money well spent, Austin said simply. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I should have been honest from the beginning. She shook her head. No, I understand why you did it the way you did. If you had told me then, I would have refused. My pride would never have let me accept. She paused, then smiled through her tears. But knowing about it now, after we've gotten to know each other, it just makes me appreciate you even more. Relief flooded through Austin. So you're not angry? I'm not angry, she confirmed. I'm grateful, and I'm touched, and I'm falling in love with you, Austin Xavier. The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Austin felt his heart stutter in his chest. You're falling in love with me? Yes, Delilah said, her voice steady despite the tears. I think I started falling the first time we talked, when you understood about needing fresh starts, and every moment since then has just made me fall deeper. Austin pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and feeling her melt against him. I'm falling in love with you too, he said into her hair. I think I started falling that night at the creek, even though I didn't know it then. You got under my skin and into my heart, and I don't want you to leave. They stood there holding each other in the cool September night, and Austin felt like he was holding something infinitely precious. This woman who had walked away from wealth and security to build a life on her own terms, who taught children with passion and dedication, who washed her only dress in the middle of the night rather than give up her independence. She was extraordinary, and somehow, miraculously, she loved him. When they finally pulled apart, Delilah was smiling, despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. We should probably go back inside before people start to talk. Let them talk, Austin said, but he knew she was right. Small towns had sharp eyes and sharper tongues, and he did not want to do anything that might damage her reputation. They walked back into the church together, and if anyone noticed that they were holding hands, or that Delilah's eyes were red from crying, no one said anything. Martha Thompson caught Austin's eye from across the room and gave him a knowing smile, and he felt gratitude wash over him for the older woman's wisdom and kindness. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness. Austin continued his work at the ranch, but every spare moment was spent with Delilah. They took long rides into the countryside on Sunday afternoons, with Delilah riding a gentle mare that Austin borrowed from the Patterson stable. They had picnics by the creek where he had first seen her, though neither of them mentioned that night directly. They attended church services together and social gatherings, and slowly the whole town began to recognize them as a courting couple. Austin met Delilah's students and was charmed by how much they clearly adored their teacher. The children ranged in age from 6 to 14, and Delilah treated each one with respect and genuine interest. She pushed them to learn and grow, while also understanding the challenges they faced. Many of the children came from poor families or had to help with farm work during harvest season, and Delilah was flexible and understanding while still maintaining high standards. One afternoon in October, Austin was at the schoolhouse helping to repair a broken window when one of Delilah's students, a girl of about 12 named Sarah, approached him shyly. Mr. Xavier, can I ask you something? Of course, Sarah. What is it? Are you going to marry Miss Hayes? Austin felt his face heat up, but he saw the genuine curiosity in the girl's eyes. I'd like to someday, if she'll have me. Why do you ask? Because she's been so much happier since you started courting her, Sarah said simply. She smiles all the time now, and sometimes she gets this far-away look like she's thinking about something wonderful. We all think you're good for her. Austin felt warmth spread through his chest. That's very kind of you to say, and for what it's worth, she makes me happier than I've ever been too. Sarah grinned. That's good. Miss Hayes deserves to be happy. She's the best teacher we've ever had, and she really cares about us. Not like some of the other teachers who just wanted to get through the day and collect their pay. It struck Austin then just how much the children understood about the adult world, how perceptive they were about the people in their lives, and it reinforced what he already knew. Delilah was special, and she was making a real difference in this small town. By November, Austin knew he wanted to marry Delilah, but he was waiting for the right moment to ask. He wanted to have something to offer her first, some security beyond his wages as a ranch hand. He had been watching the land sales in the county, and he knew that old Tom Jenkins was thinking about selling his property about 5 miles outside of Red River. It was not a large piece of land, maybe 40 acres, but it had good grazing, a decent water source, and a small house that needed work, but was structurally sound. Austin had been saving for years, and with what he had put away, he might just be able to afford it. He rode out to see Tom on a cold afternoon in late November, the wind whipping across the open land and promising snow before nightfall. Tom was in his 70s, a widower with grown children who had moved to California and wanted him to join them there. He was ready to sell and move on, ready to spend his final years near his grandchildren, rather than working a ranch alone. They sat in Tom's kitchen drinking coffee while they talked numbers. Tom wanted $400 for the property, which was fair given the land and the house. Austin had $380 saved up, and he told Tom as much. The old man studied him over his coffee cup. "I've seen you around town with the schoolteacher. You planning to settle down?" "I am, if she'll have me," Austin admitted. Tom nodded slowly. "I'll tell you what. You give me the $380 you have now, and you can owe me the other $20. Pay it when you can, no interest. I like the idea of my land going to a young couple just starting out, rather than some speculator from back east." Austin felt emotion tighten his throat. "That's very generous of you, Tom. I won't forget it." "Just take care of the place," Tom said gruffly, "and take care of that schoolteacher. Martha Thompson tells me she's a fine woman." They shook hands on the deal, and Austin rode back to the ranch feeling like he was floating. He had land now, not much, but it was his. He had a place to bring Delilah, a foundation to build a future on. It needed work, a lot of work, but he was not afraid of hard work. He could fix up the house over the winter and spring, get it ready for a wife. And then, if Delilah said yes, they could start their life together. He did not tell Delilah about the land purchase right away. He wanted to get the house into better shape first, wanted to have something worth showing her before he proposed. So he spent every spare moment that winter riding out to his new property and working on repairs. He fixed the leaking roof and replaced broken windows. He repaired the porch and patched holes in the walls. He whitewashed the inside and built new furniture for the small rooms. It was exhausting work on top of his regular ranch duties, but he did it gladly, imagining Delilah in every room, imagining the life they would build together. Delilah noticed his absences and asked about them. "You seem so busy lately," she said one Sunday afternoon in December as they walked through town. "Is everything all right at the ranch?" "Everything's fine," Austin assured her. "I've just been working on a project. I'll tell you about it soon, I promise." She looked at him with curiosity but did not push, and he loved her even more for that. She trusted him, trusted that he would share when he was ready. Christmas came to Red River with a light dusting of snow that melted by afternoon. The town held a Christmas program at the church, and Delilah's students performed a nativity play that brought tears to many eyes. Afterward, there was a social with food and music, and Austin danced with Delilah for the first time, holding her close while a fiddler played a slow waltz. "I have something for you," he murmured into her ear as they swayed together. "Austin, you didn't need to get me anything," she protested, but he could see the pleasure in her eyes. "I wanted to," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "Open it later, when you're alone." Delilah took the package, her fingers brushing against his, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. I have something for you, too." She pressed a similar small package into his hand. They finished their dance and reluctantly separated to socialize with others, but Austin's awareness never left her. He was conscious of her every movement, every smile she shared with someone else, every laugh that escaped her lips. He was besotted, and he did not care who knew it. Later that night, alone in his bunk at the ranch, Austin opened Delilah's gift. Inside the wrapping was a fine linen handkerchief with his initials embroidered in one corner in neat, careful stitches. She must have spent hours on it, working by lamplight after her teaching duties were done. He traced the letters with his finger, feeling the love and care that had gone into every stitch. His gift to her had been simpler, a leather-bound journal with blank pages for her to fill. He had noticed that she loved to write and often jotted down observations or ideas on scraps of paper. He hoped the journal would give her a proper place to record her thoughts and dreams. The winter deepened, and Austin continued working on the house whenever he could. By late January of 1879, it was starting to look like a real home. He had planted some winter vegetables in the garden and repaired the barn enough to shelter animals. The house was clean and warm, with curtains on the windows and rugs on the floors. It was not fancy, but it was solid and comfortable, a place where a family could grow and thrive. Finally, on a Sunday afternoon in early February, Austin decided it was time. He asked Delilah if she would take a ride with him, and she agreed, bundled up in her warmest coat against the cold. They rode out of town together, Delilah on the gentle mare, and Austin on his sturdy gelding, and he led her toward his property. "Where are we going?" she asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "You'll see," Austin said, feeling nervous excitement flutter in his stomach. When they crested the rise and the property came into view, Delilah gasped. "Austin, whose place is this? It looks lovely." "It's mine," he said, watching her face carefully. "I bought it from Tom Jenkins back in November. I've been fixing it up all winter." Delilah turned to stare at him, her eyes wide. "You bought land? Austin, that's wonderful, but why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to get it ready first," he said. "I wanted to have something to offer you before I asked the question I've been wanting to ask for months." He could see understanding dawn in her eyes, see hope and love and a little fear all mixed together. They dismounted and Austin led her to the house, opening the door and gesturing for her to enter. Delilah walked through the small room slowly, taking in the furniture he had built, the curtains he had hung, the stove he had repaired. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the table, looked out the window at the view of the mountains in the distance, and turned to face him with tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You did all this yourself?" "Every bit of it," Austin confirmed. "I know it's not much compared to what you grew up with in Philadelphia, but it's mine, ours, if you'll have it, if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. It was the one thing of value his father had not sold for drinking money, the one thing Austin had managed to save. He had cleaned it until it shone, and now he held it out to Delilah with a shaking hand. "Delilah Hayes, I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. You're strong and brave and kind, and you've made my life better in every way since the day I met you. Will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me?" Delilah was crying openly now, and she nodded even before she found her voice. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Austin, I'll marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, tasting the salt of her tears and the sweetness of her lips, feeling like the luckiest man in all of New Mexico. They stood there in their future home, holding each other close, and Austin felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he was meant to be, with this woman in this place, building a life together from nothing but love and hard work and determination. "When?" Delilah asked when they finally pulled apart. "When can we get married?" "Whenever you want," Austin said. "Tomorrow if you'd like, though I suppose we should give people a little notice so they can attend." Delilah laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Let's give them a month. That will give me time to finish the school term properly and find a replacement teacher, and it will give us time to prepare." "A month," Austin agreed. "I'll talk to Reverend Thompson tomorrow." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. When they arrived at Delilah's little house behind the church, Austin helped her dismount and walked her to the door. "Thank you," Delilah said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "For everything, for seeing me that night at the creek and choosing to help rather than look away, for being patient with my pride, for building us a home, for loving me." "Thank you for saying yes," Austin replied, "for taking a chance on a simple cowboy with nothing but some land and a lot of dreams." "You're not simple," Delilah said firmly. "You're extraordinary, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you." The news of their engagement spread through Red River like wildfire. Martha Thompson was delighted and immediately began organizing with the other church ladies to plan a proper wedding celebration. The school board reluctantly accepted Delilah's resignation, but made her promise to help train her replacement. Austin's fellow ranch hands at the Patterson place teased him mercilessly, but also expressed genuine happiness for him. Even Mr. Patterson himself, a gruff man who rarely showed emotion, clapped Austin on the shoulder and told him he was making a good choice. The month passed in a blur of preparation and excitement. Delilah worked with Martha to sew a wedding dress from white cotton, simple but elegant. Austin bought a new suit from the general store, the first new clothes he had owned in years. They spent their evenings together planning their future, talking about everything from how they would work the land to how many children they hoped to have someday. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, as they sat together on the porch of what would soon be their home, Delilah brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "Austin, I need to tell you something about my family back east." He heard the tension in her voice and took her hand. "What is it?" "When I left Philadelphia, my father told me I was dead to him. He said he would never acknowledge me again, and that if I ever tried to contact the family, he would deny knowing me." She paused, struggling with emotion. "I wrote to my mother a few months ago, telling her about you and about the wedding. I wanted her to know that I was happy, that I had found someone who truly loved me. I received a letter from her yesterday." Austin felt his chest tighten. "And?" "She congratulated me and told me she was proud of me for following my heart. But she also said that my father's position hasn't changed. He still considers me dead to the family. She can't come to the wedding because it would mean defying him, and she's not strong enough to do that." Delilah's voice broke. "She's choosing him over me." Austin pulled her close, feeling her pain as his own. "I'm so sorry, darling. That's not fair to you." "I know I made my choice when I left," Delilah said, wiping at her tears. "I knew there would be consequences, but it still hurts to know that my own mother won't be there on my wedding day." "Then we'll make sure the day is so full of love and joy from the people who do care about you that you won't have time to think about the ones who aren't there," Austin said firmly. "You have a whole town of people here who have come to care about you. Martha thinks of you like a daughter. Your students adore you, and you have me, and I will love you every day for the rest of our lives." Delilah looked up at him, her eyes still wet but filled with love. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think we found each other," Austin said, "and I think we're both exactly where we're supposed to be." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect March morning with the promise of spring in the air. The church was packed with townspeople, ranchers, students, and everyone who had come to know and love either Austin or Delilah or both. The building was decorated with wildflowers that some of the students had gathered, and someone had convinced the saloon to lend their piano for the occasion. Austin stood at the front of the church with Reverend Thompson, his hands sweating and his heart pounding. He wore his new suit and boots he had polished until they gleamed, and he felt both terrified and exhilarated. This was it, the beginning of everything he had dreamed about. The piano began to play, and everyone turned to watch as Delilah walked down the aisle. She had no father to give her away, so she walked alone, her head held high and her face radiant with joy. She wore her simple white dress with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, and Austin thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. When she reached him and took his hands, he saw tears of happiness in her eyes, and he knew his own eyes were damp as well. Reverend Thompson began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. But Austin barely heard the words. All he could focus on was Delilah's face, the feel of her hands in his, the incredible reality that she was about to become his wife. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Austin promised to always see her, really see her, the way he had that night at the creek. Delilah promised to always be honest with him, to trust him with her struggles as well as her joys. There was not a dry eye in the church by the time they finished. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said with a broad smile. "Austin, you may kiss your bride." And he did, pulling Delilah close and kissing her in front of God and the whole town, feeling like his heart might burst from happiness. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and someone started playing a joyful tune on the piano. The celebration afterward was held in the church social hall, with food brought by every family in town. There was dancing and laughter and so much joy that Austin felt drunk on it. He danced with his new wife, holding her close and spinning her around until she laughed breathlessly. He accepted congratulations from what felt like everyone in New Mexico. He watched Delilah surrounded by her students, all of them hugging her and telling her how happy they were for her. Martha Thompson pulled him aside at one point, her eyes twinkling. I told you the Lord was putting you two in each other's paths for a reason." "You were right," Austin admitted. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for everything, for helping me help her, and for being such a good friend to both of us." "It was my pleasure," Martha said. "Now you take good care of her, you hear? She's something special." "I know," Austin said, "and I will, I promise." As the sun began to set, Austin and Delilah said their goodbyes and rode out to their new home together. The house was waiting for them, warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk. Austin helped Delilah down from her horse, and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with surprised delight, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said, setting her down gently in the main room. "It feels like a dream," Delilah said, looking around at the home they would share. "Like I might wake up and find myself back in Philadelphia, still trapped in that life I was trying to escape." "It's not a dream," Austin assured her. "This is real. You and me and this life we're building together. It's all real." They spent their first night as husband and wife, talking and laughing and planning their future. They talked about the crops they would plant and the animals they would raise. They talked about the improvements they wanted to make to the house and the possibility of adding on more rooms someday when they needed space for children. They talked about everything and nothing, just enjoying being together without having to say goodbye at the end of the evening. As they lay together in the darkness, Delilah said softly, "Do you remember that night at the creek when you saw me washing my dress?" "Of course," Austin said, stroking her hair. "I was so scared that night," she admitted. "Scared that I had made a terrible mistake coming to Red River. Scared that I wouldn't be able to survive on my own. Scared that I had traded one kind of prison for another. But now, lying here with you, I realize that night was the beginning of everything good in my life. Because you saw me at my lowest point, and instead of judging me or looking away, you chose to help. You chose to care." "I'm glad I was riding fence line that night," Austin said. "I'm glad I saw you, even though I know it embarrassed you. Because you're right, it was the beginning of everything, not just for you, but for me too. I had been drifting for so long, working and saving, but not really living. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something that would last." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Austin thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. Not excitement or thrills, but this deep sense of contentment and rightness, this certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The next few months were hard work, but filled with joy. Austin continued working at the Patterson Ranch while also developing his own property. Delilah helped train her replacement at the school, a young woman from Santa Fe named Miss Roberts, who was enthusiastic if inexperienced. Together, Austin and Delilah planted a vegetable garden and established a small herd of cattle. They bought chickens and built a coop, and Delilah declared that she had never tasted eggs as good as the ones from their own hens. They learned to work together, to anticipate each other's needs and support each other through challenges. When a spring storm damaged part of their fence, they repaired it together. When Delilah struggled with missing her mother and the family she had left behind, Austin held her and listened and reminded her that she had a new family now. When Austin worried about money and whether he could make the ranch successful, Delilah reminded him of how much they had already accomplished and how strong they were together. By summer, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Austin one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I think we're going to have a baby," she said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Austin felt joy and terror and wonder all crash over him at once. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be," Delilah said, and he could hear both excitement and nervousness in her voice. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Austin pulled her close, feeling tears sting his eyes. "I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled, and so grateful I can barely breathe. We're going to have a baby, Delilah. A family." "A family?" she repeated, and he heard the wonder in her voice. "I never really thought about having children when I was back east. It seemed like just another expectation, another role I was supposed to fill. But now, with you, I want this baby so much. I want to fill this house with children and love and laughter." They spent the rest of the evening making plans and dreaming about the future. They talked about names and whether it would be a boy or girl. They talked about adding on to the house to make space for a nursery. They talked about the kind of parents they wanted to be, the values they wanted to teach their children. The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and Austin would hold her hair back while she was ill, and then bring her crackers and weak tea to settle her stomach. But as the months passed and her belly grew round with their child, she seemed to glow with health and happiness. Austin loved watching the changes in her body, loved feeling the baby kick and move under his hand when he held her at night. In December of 1879, on a snowy afternoon that reminded Austin of their wedding day, Delilah went into labor. Martha Thompson came to help, along with the town doctor, and Austin was banished to the main room where he paced and worried and prayed. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness, and he could hear Delilah crying out in pain from the bedroom. He felt helpless and terrified, wishing there was something he could do to ease her suffering. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, he heard the sharp cry of a newborn baby. Austin's legs nearly gave out from relief. A few minutes later, Martha emerged from the bedroom with a smile on her tired face. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and Delilah is doing well. You can go in and see them now." Austin walked into the bedroom on shaking legs and found Delilah propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. And when he looked down at his son's face for the first time, Austin felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was his child, his son. This tiny, perfect human being was part of him and part of Delilah, a physical manifestation of their love. "He's beautiful," Austin whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You're both beautiful." "Would you like to hold him?" Delilah asked, and Austin nodded, too overwhelmed for words. She placed the baby in his arms, and Austin looked down at the small face, the tiny fingers curled into fists, the shock of dark hair. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you." "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, considering options and debating meanings. But now, holding his son, Austin knew exactly what felt right. "What about Thomas?" he suggested. "After Tom Jenkins, who sold us this land and gave us a chance to build our life here." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Xavier. It's perfect." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He ate well and slept reasonably well, and Austin fell more in love with him every single day. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep or study the world with unfocused infant eyes. He sang to him and told him stories and made promises about the kind of father he would be. Delilah took to motherhood with the same passion and dedication she brought to everything else. She was patient and loving, and she seemed to know instinctively what Thomas needed. Austin would find her in the rocking chair by the window, nursing the baby and singing softly, and his heart would swell with so much love he thought it might break. The years that followed were full and rich. Austin continued to develop the ranch, gradually building up their cattle herd and improving the property. He eventually left his position at the Patterson Ranch to focus full-time on their own land. Money was often tight, especially in those early years, but they always had enough to get by. More importantly, they had each other and the life they were building together. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed Austin around the ranch and asked endless questions about everything he saw. When Thomas was 2 years old, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Delilah's mother, whom she still hoped might someday reconcile with her. Margaret was quieter than Thomas had been, with her mother's green eyes and a sweet, gentle disposition. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Austin proved to have a gift for raising cattle, and their small herd gradually became one of the most respected in the region. They were not wealthy, not by any means, but they were comfortable and secure. The house expanded as Austin added on rooms, including a proper parlor and separate bedrooms for the children. The garden flourished under Delilah's care, providing vegetables and herbs year-round. When Thomas was 5 and Margaret was 3, Delilah received a letter that made her both cry and smile. It was from her mother, writing in secret without her father's knowledge. She apologized for not being strong enough to stand up to him years ago, but she wanted Delilah to know that she thought about her every day. She wanted to know about her grandchildren, wanted to be part of their lives, even if it had to be through letters. It was not everything Delilah had hoped for, but it was something. It was a beginning. Delilah wrote back immediately, and from then on, she and her mother corresponded regularly. She sent photographs of the children and descriptions of their life in New Mexico. Her mother sent gifts for the children and expressed her pride in how Delilah had built such a good life for herself. It would be several more years before Delilah's father died, and her mother finally came to visit, but the connection through letters helped heal some of the pain of that long separation. Life in Red River brought its share of challenges. There were droughts that tested their water supply and their cattle. There were harsh winters that made survival difficult. There were illnesses that swept through town and left families grieving. Through it all, Austin and Delilah faced everything together, supporting each other and their children through the hard times and celebrating together during the good ones. When Thomas was 7, he asked his father how he and his mother had met. They were working together in the barn, mucking out stalls, and Austin had been wondering when this question would come. "Your mother was the bravest woman I ever met," Austin began, leaning on his pitchfork. "She came all the way from Philadelphia to teach school here, leaving everything she knew behind to build a new life. I saw her one night when she was struggling, and I knew I wanted to help her. And the more I got to know her, the more I realized she was someone extraordinary. So I courted her, and I was lucky enough that she agreed to marry me." "But how did you know you loved her?" Thomas persisted. Austin thought about that question, about trying to explain to his young son the complexity of falling in love. "I knew because when I was with her, everything felt right. Like all the pieces of my life that had been scattered around finally came together into something that made sense. And I knew because I wanted to make her happy more than I wanted anything else in the world." Thomas considered this seriously. "Do you still feel that way?" "Every single day," Austin said honestly. "Your mother is my best friend and my partner in everything. We built this life together, and I love her more now than I did the day we got married." It was true. After more than 8 years of marriage, Austin was more in love with Delilah than ever. They had grown together, weathered storms together, built a family and a home and a life together. He loved the woman she had become, the mother she was to their children, the partner she was to him in running the ranch. He loved how she still taught reading to children in town on weekends, unable to give up her passion for education completely. He loved how she sang while she worked, and how she could make him laugh even on the hardest days. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin took Delilah back to the spot where they had first walked together. That place at the edge of town where they had stood and looked out at the mountains. Their children were with Martha Thompson for the afternoon, and they had a few precious hours alone together. "Do you ever regret it?" Austin asked as they stood hand in hand, watching the sun move across the sky. "Giving up your old life, coming here, marrying me?" Delilah turned to look at him with surprise. "Regret it? Austin, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life we have, it's not always easy, but it's real and it's ours. I'm happier than I ever thought possible." "I just want to make sure you know how much I appreciate you," Austin said. "How much I appreciate the choice you made to be with me, to build this life with me. You could have gone back east, could have found someone with more money or status, but you chose me. I chose you because I love you," Delilah said firmly. "Because you saw me when I was at my lowest, and you chose kindness instead of judgment. Because you're a good man, Austin Xavier. Because you're a wonderful father and husband. Because every day with you is better than any day I had in my old life." She paused, then smiled. "Besides, do you remember what you told me once? About how sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's just being human? I think about that all the time. You helped me when I needed it most, and that help became the foundation of everything good in my life. I'll never regret that." Austin pulled her close, holding her against his chest and feeling grateful beyond words. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and he thought about that night, almost 11 years ago, when he had seen her washing her clothes at the creek. He had not known then that helping her would change his entire life. He had not known that the woman he saw struggling in the darkness would become his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in everything. He had just known that he could not look away, could not ignore someone in need. And that one choice, that decision to offer help with kindness and discretion, had led to everything. To this life, this love, this family, to a home full of laughter and children, to a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection, to a love story that had started with a simple act of compassion and grown into something beautiful and lasting. More years passed, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch and wanted to work it with his father someday. Margaret showed her mother's passion for learning and her father's work ethic. Austin and Delilah welcomed 2 more children, another daughter named Catherine when Thomas was 9, and finally a second son they named Daniel when Austin was 36 and Delilah was 32. The ranch continued to prosper. Austin bought more land when he could afford it, expanding their holdings and their cattle herd. He hired help during busy seasons, and he became known throughout the region as a fair employer and honest cattleman. Delilah started a small school in their home for ranch children who lived too far from town to attend regular school, teaching a handful of students in their parlor 2 days a week. Together, they became pillars of the Red River community, respected and loved by their neighbors. When Delilah's mother finally visited in the summer of 1890, it was an emotional reunion. Mrs. Hayes was now a widow, her strict husband having passed away the previous winter. She stayed for 3 months, getting to know her grandchildren and the life Delilah had built. Before she left to return to Philadelphia, she took Austin aside. "Thank you," she said simply, "for loving my daughter and giving her the life she deserved. I've seen how happy she is, how much you cherish her. I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to see it for myself." "She's easy to love," Austin said, "and she's the strongest person I know. You should be proud of her." "I am, Mrs." Hayes said with tears in her eyes. "I always have been, even when I was too frightened to say so." The children grew, and the ranch thrived, and Austin and Delilah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered everything life threw at them: droughts and floods, economic depressions and cattle diseases, the challenges of raising 4 children with different temperaments and dreams. Through it all, they remained each other's constant support and greatest love. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Austin and Delilah stood together on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sun set over their land. Thomas was 18 now, and working the ranch full-time alongside his father. Margaret was 16, already engaged to a young man from a neighboring ranch. Catherine was 11, and Daniel was just 8, both still children, but growing fast. 20 years, Delilah said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was washing my only dress in the creek at midnight, wondering how I would survive." "I'm glad I rode fence line that night," Austin said, pulling her close. "I'm glad I saw you." "So am I," Delilah said. "That night changed everything. You changed everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Delilah spoke again. "Do you know what I think about sometimes? I think about the woman I would have become if I had stayed in Philadelphia and married the man my father chose. I would have been comfortable and respectable and utterly miserable. I would never have known what real love feels like. I would never have known the satisfaction of building something with my own hands, of raising children who are independent and strong, of being truly partners with my husband in every sense of the word." "You never would have been happy," Austin agreed. "No," Delilah said firmly. "I wouldn't have, but I am happy now, deliriously, wonderfully happy. Even when things are hard, even when we're struggling, I'm happy because I'm with you and because this life is ours." Austin kissed her then, a sweet kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of those early days of courtship. "I love you, Delilah Xavier, more than anything in this world." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for choosing kindness. Thank you for loving me." As the years continued to roll by, Austin and Delilah watched their children grow into adults who carried the values they had worked so hard to instill. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself to be as capable and dedicated as his father. He married a sensible young woman named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the western edge of the property, keeping the family close. Margaret married her sweetheart and moved to his family's ranch about 20 miles away, but she visited often with her growing family. Catherine surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher like her mother had been, and she went to Santa Fe for training. Daniel, the baby of the family, showed a gift for working with horses and dreamed of starting a breeding program. Austin and Delilah became grandparents, delighting in the next generation of children who would carry on the family legacy. They grew older gracefully, their hair turning silver and their faces marking the years of hard work and laughter. But their love never aged. It remained fresh and vital, a constant source of joy and strength. On a warm spring evening in 1895, when Austin was 51 and Delilah was 47, they sat together on the porch swing he had built years ago. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, and the children grown and gone to their own lives. It was just the two of them again, the way it had been in those early days of their marriage. "We did it," Delilah said contentedly, her head resting on Austin's shoulder. "We built a good life." "We did," Austin agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible back when I was just a wandering cowboy with nothing but a hope and a prayer." "You were never just anything," Delilah corrected him gently. "You were always extraordinary. You just needed someone to see it." "And you were always strong," Austin countered. "Even when you were struggling, even when you had nothing but one dress and your determination. You never gave up." They rocked gently on the swing, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Austin thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. From that night at the creek when he had first seen her, through their courtship and marriage, through building the ranch and raising their children, through all the joys and sorrows and ordinary moments that make up a life. It had been hard sometimes, but it had been worth every moment. "Do you remember what I said to you on our wedding day?" Delilah asked softly. "About how you saw me, really saw me, the way you did the night at the creek." "I remember," Austin said. "I want you to know that you've kept that promise every single day of our marriage. You've always seen me, really seen me, not just as your wife or the mother of your children, but as me, as Delilah. That's one of the greatest gifts you've ever given me." Austin felt emotions swell in his chest. "You've given me so much more than I ever gave you. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me love that I never thought I deserved. You made me want to be the best man I could possibly be." "We gave those things to each other," Delilah said. "That's what partnership means. That's what real love is." They stayed on the porch swing until the moon rose high overhead, talking quietly about their past and their future, about the grandchildren they adored and the legacy they were leaving. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the easy intimacy that comes from decades of loving someone deeply and completely. As they finally made their way inside to bed, Austin looked back at the ranch spread out under the moonlight. This land, this home, this life, it was all more than he had ever imagined for himself all those years ago, when he was just a young cowboy riding fence line. And it had all started because he chose to help someone in need, because he saw a woman struggling and decided to do something about it. That simple act of kindness had grown into the most beautiful life he could have imagined. It had brought him love and family and purpose. It had given him Delilah, who had transformed from a woman washing her only dress in the creek into his beloved wife and the mother of his children. It had given him a story worth living, a love worth celebrating, a legacy worth leaving. And as Austin lay in bed that night with Delilah warm and safe in his arms, he offered up a prayer of gratitude for that chance encounter all those years ago, for fence line that needed riding and moonlight that revealed her struggle, for the courage to offer help, and for Delilah's courage to eventually accept it, for every moment since then that had woven their lives together into something strong and beautiful. The cowboy had seen the schoolteacher washing her clothes late at night and realized she had nothing else to wear. That realization had changed everything. It had led to fabric and dresses, to conversations and courtship, to love and marriage and family. It had led to this life they had built together, this love that had sustained them through everything. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the struggles they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the love they had built and nurtured and cherished every single day. A love that had started with compassion and grown into something that would last forever. A love story written in the hard work of building a life together, in the laughter of children and grandchildren, in the quiet moments of connection that made every day worth living. They had found each other in the darkness by a moonlit creek, two people who needed each other, even though neither of them knew it yet. And together, they had built a life filled with light and love and laughter. A life that proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest love stories. A life that was everything either of them had ever wanted and so much more than they had ever dared to dream.